I tried to get it down to 20 minutes flat, and so here we go. We'll start with Coryphantha robustispina. That's the Pima pineapple cactus. It's endangered. The buds sit there for like 2 months. In the middle of summer, you're waiting for it to bloom, and then finally, there it goes. It's blooming. This plant I'd wanted to see for years, and finally got to see it in bloom in Pima County, but I won't be more specific because it is a very sensitive species. And some of them even had single flowers like that I got to photograph. This was a long time of waiting for those flowers to open. Another one that's a very sensitive species is the Nichols Turk's Head cactus. This is found over in the Watermans, and it really likes areas with a lot of limestone. These things bloom. This one bloomed on June 7th of 2020. They not only bloom during the hottest time of the year, but the flowers don't open until it's noon. So you have to be out in the heat of the day to see those flowers. And you can see all the surrounding vegetation is all browned off. It's just as dry as a bone out there. And you have to be out there in the heat, but it's worth it because these things are neat. They all synchronize their blooming too. They seem to bloom basically all at once. So all the flowers are opening over 1 hour time. Really, really cool. Okay, and then moving right along, the Arizona rainbow cactus. Now this one, I'd been in Arizona for 45 years before I got to see one in bloom, which is a long time to wait. But when I finally got to see them, wow, it was worth the wait. And these are 2 plants, the combined flowers of, but this one plant had 8 enormous flowers on it. Just mind-boggling. Well worth the wait for these Arizona rainbows. Another one that blooms during the summer is Escobario vivipara, also known as a beehive cactus, I guess, or something like that. This thing bloomed in July of 2014, and here's one in bloom. Once again, it's kind of worth it. So even during the hot time of the year, you can see some really pretty things. And what talk would be complete without the queen of the night? So this is in the morning after they have been blooming. This is wild plant, so it's not in one of those gardens where they keep a lot of them. And here's one with 4 blooms. Fred Heath told me that there was one in Sabino that had 16 flowers. I didn't get to see that, but these things are well worth the wait. Once again, these uncommon cacti frequently synchronize their blooming, probably to enhance their probability of cross-pollination. So, queen of the night, really a queen. Okay, changing gears, orchids, calypso orchids. Who would think that there'd be orchids in Arizona? Well, these are up in the San Francisco Peaks in Arizona. So I did the 6-hour drive to see calypso orchids in late June. And that was in 2019. And by golly, there were numbers of them blooming up there. It absolutely was stunning being able to see calypso orchids. Coral root orchids. So thanks to Frank Rose, I found out where to find these spotted coral root orchids. They, of course, are parasitic on the mycorrhizal networks that run between tree roots. So they have no chlorophyll of their own. They kind of blend in with the pine needles where they're growing in under pine trees and other conifers. But when they're in bloom, those beautiful spotted lips really pop out at you. So those are one kind of coral root orchid, which are Coloriza. Now, the other coral root orchid genus that we have is Hexalectrix. So this is Hexalectrix warnockii, growing in Chiricahua National Monument. And you need to be there in mid-August to see these things blooming. They blend in with the soil, the leaf litter really well. Their flowers point downwards, and you really don't see them that easily unless you get low to the ground like this, and then you see that beautiful ruffled lip. And there was a guy that would fly all the way from back east every year hoping to see these things and couldn't hadn't been successful in being able to see them. Okay, a different kind of orchid is the adder's mouth, Malexis corymbosa. Those flowers point upwards. We're going to take a deep dive now into the tiny flowers, the individual ones. So we're going to go a little closer and a little closer and a little closer, and finally an individual flower. So that's the beauty of macro photography, is that you can do these deep dives. And we're going to do the same thing with this lady's tress orchid. This is from up on Mount Lemon. Tiny little plant, very inconspicuous. Thanks to Frank Rose, I knew where these were. And a deep dive again into these tiny flowers. I think of them as fire and ice, because the throat looks like fire and the outer edges of the lip look like crystals of ice. Really neat when you get to see them close up like that. Now for our changing gears again, we're going to look at some other succulents. This is Graptopetalum rusbii. This is in the Crassulaceae family. And once again, I have to thank Frank Rose for showing me this population.
So sorry, but in that previous photo, what's the spider in the background? I know you,
There,
if anyone can
okay,
tell.
there was a immature black widow living under there. Yeah, that was capturing ants mainly. Okay, but very good that you picked up on that. Okay, and these are called leather petals or something like that, the common name, but I think of them as Graptopetalum rusbii. These bloom in May. When they're not in bloom, they're pretty inconspicuous in the rocky little areas that they like to favor. And then they send up these beautiful flower spikes that poke up from the base of the plant. And you'll notice something really interesting about this. I'm going to try to point it out. Uh-oh. Okay, wait a second. Is this, okay. So this one here, you'll notice has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these petals around here. This one has only 6. And this one down here has 7. So even on a single flower spike, you're going to see a number of different petals on these flowers. Really strange looking. Whoops, sorry about that, went backwards. And here you can also see an interesting thing where the younger flower, the anthers all kind of tight together in the center, and then the older flower, they all splay out like a starburst pattern. So it's really, really kind of beautiful looking flowers. Just a few more close-ups of these things. I could not get enough of these. So I took like a zillion pictures.
Are the sepals on that succulent, or you go back one more?
Okay.
You can see the bud down at the bud.
Yeah. There's, yeah, I think that, I'm not sure what these things, these fat things around the base are, but I'm not enough of a botanist to know what all those structures are called. I'm really basically a very amateur botanist, and I have a lot of help from experts. Okay, here's Graptopetalum bartrami, which is a cousin to the rusbii. This one likes more mesic conditions, so higher up in elevation where there's juniper and oak. You can see some live oak leaves laying around there. It sends out flower spikes, very similar to the rusbii, except that this blooms in October. Rusbii blooms in May. This thing blooms in October, opposite times. So they have a very, there's no way that they could ever hybridize, not normally anyway. And these have more finely speckled petals, really pretty. Once again, there's those anthers kind of splayed out. And these finely speckled petals. Okay, now to change gears again, after all those drier land things, we're gonna go into the wet, soggy plants, lobelia. So here's a blue lobelia. Once again, thanks to Frank Rose for showing me where these things were. You can see how wet they like it. A little stream running right there. This was up on Mount Lemon, I think at Butterfly Trail is where I got these. And when you get a little closer, they have this wonderfully whimsical structure to their flowers that I could not get enough of. And then their cousin, the scarlet lobelia, once again, they like wet feet. This was in the Huachucas, blooming in August or September. And they're in among horsetails. I actually had to wade into the little stream to get these photos, but it was worth it. Beautiful looking, just insanely red looking. I've seen these down in Sycamore Canyon too, but they're not very common in Arizona, at least not in southern Arizona. Okay, changing gears. Sand food, yeah. I do shake things up a little bit here. So these are Felisma sonora or sonori. So these are the sand food that do occur in Arizona, but I got these photos in the Algodones dunes. So they occur in this really deserty looking area in Southern California, just over the border from Arizona.
Looks like a good place to break down.
Yeah, and you can see, you'll always find them, see that little lump sitting out away from that bush. So these are parasitic on the roots of these shrubs. And here's a lens cap as to give you some scale. So they're only a few, 2-3 inches across, something like that.
Did people eat
And
the roots?
you'll see, if you can hold on to the questions until later, thanks. So these are, once again, parasitic on a number of different shrubs. This is, I forget what species this is. I'm sorry, I meant to look it up.
Next time in a elytra.
Thank you very much. There you go. And sometimes they grow really close into the base of the shrub. So this was something I didn't discover right away. The ones that have been blooming for a while form these funny looking flower structures where they almost look like crested structures, but you can see some leaves on that stem. These are only the inflorescences that stick up above the surface. All the rest of the plant, of course, is underground, parasitic on the roots of its host. And now we're going to look at a few examples of them. So that's a really nice example of a couple of them blooming. And we'll take a quick deep dive, a very fast one. There's the close-up of the little flowers. And these are in the Boraginaceae family. And their cousin, Felisma aerarium, is also known as the purple pop-ups. These I find in Parker, Arizona, in some areas with sand dunes. So you can see the sand verbena there and the little purple pop-up right next to it. They're also parasitic on the roots of other plants. So you just see the inflorescences poking up above the sand. There they are. And they, as you get closer in and in, they're stunningly beautiful little flowers. Okay, and then sleepy catch flies. These are in the Campanulaceae family, I believe. No, yeah, yeah, you're right. Anyway, these sleepy catch flies, most people don't notice them. They're not rare or anything like that, but for the most part, they look like this with most of the flowers closed during the day. There is one open flower still on that photo, but they're pretty inconspicuous, these thready little plants. But when you get close, they are really pretty. And some of the other silenes are a little more spectacular. Schooleri is up on Mount Lemon on the Butterfly Trail. You can find those. And I think even Meadow Loop Trail or thereabouts, I've seen them. And then, of course, this one's spectacular. This one I got to see on a plant walk, Arizona Native Plant Society plant walk some years back with Doug Moore and the Carrie Nation Trail in the Santa Ritas. And there was one of these in bloom, and I just went bonkers for it. Absolutely crazy for it. I'd wanted to see one of these for years. And so most of the plants that I've shown you are ones that I have specifically been looking for. They have been on my wish list. I wait years sometimes to see and want to see. But this one I simply stumbled on by accident, this big blue gentian in the Huachucas in Garden Canyon in a wet area, just like where the scarlet lobelia was blooming. And once again, this thing was blooming in mid-September. And it was stunning. These things are like a couple inches across. They're really, really spectacular blue flowers. And another accidental find was that this little owl clover, Castilleja attenuata. And I was meeting with Frank Rose at Molino Basin to show him my camera gear. And we went, and both of us spotted this thing at the same time. And he'd been going up that mountain for over 30 years. And this was the first time he'd ever found this. So we both felt extremely lucky. And they look really whimsical because to me, they look like a little face with a nose, you know, 2 eyes and a little schnoz. But a really great find. And of course, these are considered to be sort of semi-parasitic, I believe. They do have chlorophyll, but they are in a group of plants that are sort of tapping into other plants. Okay, now for the Desert 5 spot. I'd wanted to see these for years. Just this past spring, I finally got to see them in the Anza Borrego Desert in California. So we went specifically with this as a target, drove along the road where they allegedly had been found. I told Bill, let's stop here. And we walked out of the car, went to the base of the hill, and bingo, there were like 5 of them right there. So it was like knowing right where to, just having a sense of where they should be. And these, once again, open, they never completely opened, but they got more open as it got closer to noon. And they were blooming, let's see, I have a cheat sheet. They were blooming on March 8th this year. So that was a big treat to see those. Now, no talk would be complete without talking about super blooms. So far, all the plants I've been talking about are ones that are sort of uncommon or that you have to really look for or pay attention to or whatever. Of course, super blooms are just the opposite. These things blanket the landscape. And you can see these purple swatches down at the flat area below those mountain slopes. As you get a little closer, there's those purple swatches. Those are all sand verbena at Anza Borrego Park. This was back in March and April of 2019. And you can see people just, there ended up being hundreds of people walking around looking at these things. And I can see why. They are really, really beautiful. So you find them in the sand areas, these sand verbenas. And even the individual plants are worthy of notice. The other thing that was going through a super bloom in the same park, but nobody was paying much attention, were the Bigelow's monkey flower. So these are now in Phrymaceae. They've been moved out of the Scrophulariaceae back quite some time ago. These were blooming again in March, and I had them on my wish list. I was hoping to see these beautiful monkey flowers, and I was not disappointed because there wasn't just a few. There were a blanket of them along this wash, thousands of them, just a river of pink. Amazing. And as a bonus, we also got to see ghost flowers, which was high on my wish list. These are really beautiful in Anza Borrego Park. And also the ajo lilies were blooming there. So that was high on my list. And by the way, on the drive to Anza Borrego, as you go through that area near Yuma, there's a whole bunch of dunes that had hundreds of these things blooming at that time. Just hundreds. It was amazing. And then later on in April, I hit the Joshua Tree Monument and got to see this Mentzelia, which is called Sand Blazing Star or something like that. But these are pretty good sized plants. They're like halfway up my thigh. You know, they're really good sized. Here's a close up of one. But the real showstopper were the Phacelia campanularia that spring. I could not believe these desert bluebells. These were along a wash, cutting through Joshua Tree Monument. And there were all these trees, I mean, all these cars just zipping along the road. And bushes were screening their view of this wash. And I pulled over in a parking area along the side of the road, and I zipped down and took a look, and there was no one else, not one single soul that I saw down there that day or the next. And there was a river of blue flowers. I mean, thousands of these beautiful bluebells in that wash, and nobody else was even looking at them. I don't think that they even knew that they were there, to be honest with you. And the sky and the rocks and everything, it was just a magical feeling, seeing these thousands of these incredible blue flowers. And no talk would be complete with super blooms if we didn't mention our Picacho Peak. Back in March of 2023, we had a super bloom that was apparently was for the record books at Picacho Peak. And in all the years I'd been in Arizona, I had never been to Picacho Peak during any of the poppies blooming. And here you have these Mexican gold poppies coming down in like rivers flowing off of the slopes. And if you went around to the backside, you saw these swatches of poppies and then millions of lupins. So you see how there's like blue here, those are all lupins, and then these are all poppies. So it was just unbelievable. It looked like somebody had dumped cans of paint on the slopes of the mountains. And what puzzled me is why there were no painters there. I mean, if Van Gogh could have been alive, he would have been absolutely going crazy, you know. But they don't have little spots where people can set up an easel and paint, you know. So it's like the trails, they didn't have any little spots where people could do that. I thought to myself, they really should. So anyway, these slopes at Picacho Peak with these lupins and poppies were just unbelievable. It looked like an ocean of blue lupins. And it wouldn't be complete spring without your spring. We don't have robins, of course, we have Western diamondbacks. And it was perfect. This snake was very mellow. Let me take a photo just a few feet away from it, and it wasn't rattling or anything. So far we've been talking about more conspicuous flowers. I can't do a talk like this without including a few tiny flowers. So one of my old favorites is Aenia filiformis. This used to be in its own family, Sterculiaceae, the chocolate family, but that's been lumped in with the Malvaceae now, last thing I knew. So in the mallow family. They're tiny. The Aenia filiformis is an herbaceous little plant. So kind of a puny little plant. Very elegant little flower though. But one that a lot of people aren't aware of is this other one, Aenia microphylla. And this is a woody shrub. Has neat little flowers, very similar to the filiformis. As you can see, with those neat strap-like structures. And then you can see these anthers on the backside. Some older anthers there. And that neat structure. And then another one that I love is Nemocladus. So Nemocladus orientalis is our local species here in the Arizona desert. This particular individual that has more rosy color on it was in the Watermans just this last spring. There's my finger behind it for scale. These are pretty tiny, but up close they are exquisite. And another Nemocladus I very much wanted to see was Nemocladus rubescens. So this was one of the target plants that we went all the way to the Anza Borrego Desert to see this last spring. And we went to Hell Hole Canyon that has these beautiful California palm trees, native palm trees. And along the way to those palm trees, there's some washes with a Bigelow's monkey flower. And I thought, you know, I bet the Nemocladus is right down in there. And we went down, and sure enough, there's the little thread plant, and there's the flowers. And that's what the flowers look like up close. They're little flowers, but they are worth the effort of getting down to the ground and getting that shot. And then to finish, I'll start at the beginning. because this photo was taken in 2004. It was one of the first plants that I photographed. It was right in my own, close to my house. And these Polygola, I brought a little sprig of it into the U of A herbarium, and Phil Jenkins was there as the outreach person. And he took that little sprig and he put it under the dissecting scope, and he said something to the effect of, you know, these are the most exquisite flowers when you see them under the scope. So the little sprig looked something like this, but when you got it under the scope, it looked something like that. And I looked at the flower under the scope and I said, I have got to try to get these things in photographs. And I've been chasing wildflowers for the 20 years since I looked at those Polygola under the scope, thanks to Phil Jenkins at the U of A herbarium. So I have several people to thank for inspiring me with these plants, real botanists. I'm not a real botanist, but I do what I can. And I hope that you enjoyed this talk. Thanks. A few questions, okay. Do we have time for a few, or, okay, great.
The last data had something that looked like a Coke spoon with pollen at the bottom. Bottom of the flower. There
Oh,
was this orange mass. Was that pollen down there?
Back a couple of
okay, we'll go back a little bit here.
It was also the first picture you showed, yeah.
Oh, yeah, this one, okay. Yeah, this, so this little structure down here is the anther, okay? And I think that there might even be a stigma somewhere in there, but I'm not sure. Then these little glass-like structures are really neat because they capture the sunlight, and I think that that's what attracts flies or pollinators to those little structures, to the flower. But as the flower matures, sometimes the arrangement of these little structures will change. Like, I should have shown you some with different maturation so that you could see that, but they're kind of interesting how a lot of these flowers, just like what I showed with the graptopetalum, the anthers will change position and stuff like that as the flower matures, because a lot of times the anther on any one flower will mature at a different time than the stigma does. So you get changes of position and stuff like that between the different flower parts as the flower matures. So
What camera and what macro lens are you using?
okay, my macro setup I use for this particular photo, I used a Canon EOS 6D, I think it is. It's kind of the mid-range, you know, single lens reflex DSLR from like 7 or 8 years ago. I haven't upgraded it yet to a mirrorless. And for the macro lens on this one, I used the MPE 65 millimeter, which is a super macro lens. These optics that you see on this photo is far superior to what a normal 100 millimeter lens will give you. The normal macro lens is 100 millimeter that most people use for most flowers, but for these tiny ones, the MPE 65 millimeter is really gives you just much better optics. And unfortunately, they don't make that lens anymore, so you have to get it used if you're trying to find it. There's another company, Lawawa, that makes some kind of super macro lens now that you get an adapter for the Canons. And then I use a flash, a Sigma ring flash with manual settings on it so that you can manually set all the exposures. And I use all manual settings. So all manual focus, I set everything manually, because I find that if you have auto anything, it screws up the photo. So for macro photography, it's really good to just learn. There's only 4 variables to set: your aperture size, shutter speed, ISO, and then the flash, how much flash you want to use. So it's not complicated. It's pretty easy. When I showed Frank Rose my setup, he took to it like a duck to water, and he had a lot of fun doing small flowers after that. And it was a lot of fun for him, I think. But some people, I will warn you, some people hate that lens. There's people that that spend the money for that lens and then they regret it, they never use it because they never get the hang of it. So you just have to, it's all manual, everything for that lens pretty much. So, any other questions?
For the sand foods, and they may be different between the two species, do all the flowers flower at once? Or do they
No,
flower
I don't think that I don't think so, because there were some that were well gone by in that same general area that looked old and gone by, and then there were some that were in beautiful full bloom. So I don't think that they synchronized their blooming all at once.
But
Within a plant, maybe. I haven't studied them enough to be honest.
And there were just a lot of flowers present, but
Yeah.
in buds too, it's hard to tell.
And one question I have is why on earth do things like Nichols bloom? Got lost. Why would they bloom, you know, in June when it's absolutely the hottest time of year at the hottest time of the day? And all I can think of is that way they avoid competition for pollinators, maybe. I mean, early in the spring, there's prickly pears, all kinds of other cacti blooming, and maybe pollinators are kind of diluted out. But honestly, that's a horrible time of the year for anything to be out. And I just wonder how on earth they get anybody to go visit them, you know? I mean, we were the only ones out there that day to see them, and they were hundreds of them in bloom, and we were the only people out there.
You see very many pollinators when you were out there.
Saw a few, but not very many. There were a few cactus specialist bees that were hitting them, but boy, that they have to be able to thermoregulate to the nth degree in that heat though. That's a real challenge for an insect that flies to thermoregulate in like 110-degree temperatures at noon, you know, very hard. So.
Well, thank you so much for your talk
Oh,
and
well,
moving on. Thank you.
yeah. But thank you.
No, you're good. We'll pull your USB out.
Here's this little thing.
It's working on Zoom, so we talk loud for the audience here, but I can hear it just fine on Zoom. Down arrow will advance slide. Correct. A little laser pointer there. Fire up your show and we'll be ready to go.
All right. Sorry, the mic's not working, but I'll try to talk loud. Oh, it says dead battery on it. That's might be the problem.
Dead battery. Oh,
Okay.
oh.
See, they usually keep spares down here.
Back in action. All right. Spare batteries. Who runs this place? That's amazing. Budget crisis, smudget crisis. All right. Let's see here. Let's start my timer. This is a topic I love and one that I could talk about for an hour easily. So I want to be respectful of our time and keep it to 20 minutes. My name is Logan Phillips. I'm a writer and an organizer here in Tucson, also an avid plant nerd, member of the Native Plant Society for quite a while. And I've been involved in this effort, the Tucson Birthplace Open Space Coalition, since around 2017, although the last 2 years or so have been really exciting. And there's been some exciting developments I wanted to share with other members because things have changed for the better in regards to this space.
Sorry, on the Zoom, we're still seeing that old show. So let me just.
I guess I'll share the whole thing maybe. Should do it.
Oh, yeah, you'll be good to go.
All right.
Thank you.
Hit that again? Yeah, no problem. So many of you are probably familiar with this site. This is, of course, just south of Mission Garden here. I'll do this on the mouse so folks online can see. Mission Garden here and Barrio Sin Nombre just to the north here, Barrio Kroger Lane across the river, Santa Cruz and the west side, a mountain neighborhood to the south. And so this, of course, is ancestral land. This is considered to be the birthplace of Tucson, kind of from the southern sweep of Sentinel all the way around to the north part of Tumamoc, a series of villages over thousands of years. Archaeological evidence in this area dates to about 4,000 years. We know that folks have been in the area since about 10,000 years. So that's happening here. As a coalition, we are in conversation with the San Javier district of the Tohono O'odham Nation regularly, and they are part of the coalition. And we understand that this place is incredibly valuable. And yes, it was a landfill for 9 years, and we'll talk about that. But this land is healing itself. As Senora Josefina Cardenas of Barrio Kroger Lane reminds us, this has become a de facto wildlife refuge now. With the reflow of the Santa Cruz River due to the Heritage Project and the increased height of the water table, we have dens of coyotes. The first place I've ever seen a kit fox in the wild was on this land. We have trail cams from Mission Garden that, you know, all of your kind of urban interface species are there. But also some more rare things like the kit fox and reptiles, more horned lizards than I've ever seen. Thanks to the bufflegrass and the immense amount of seed that is out there, there's an immense amount of ants, huge horned lizards. So this has become a de facto wildlife refuge. With the reflow of the Santa Cruz River, it has also become an important corridor. This is the last place in the urban core of Tucson where the Tucson Mountains touch the river without there being development in between. And so we see that connectivity being really pretty crucial. So this is some of us, and we are a diverse coalition in all the ways. We came together, like I said, after years of fighting development proposals for this site. You may remember the last one, 2017, where they wanted to put a competitive cycling arena on this site. And that one went nowhere, of course, as they never do. But we have about 60 years of failed development ideas. Every 5 years or so they come around, and every 5 years there has to be a fight. And we decided that we're done fighting, and we want to work together to create a pathway for a more just future for this land. And so we mapped what we agree on, because many times when people come together, we start from how we're different, and we start from what our differences are. But instead, we decided to start with what we agree on. And the one thing that everyone agrees on is that this land should be permanently protected as open space. And from that agreement, we kind of moved outwards. I'll spare us all of the text on this slide. But the most important part here we save for last, which is chiefly what we believe, apart from open space, is that the decision-making for this land should be made by the people who have most been affected by the land use over the last 100 years, specifically the residents of the barrios and all around it, and the Santa Cruz, the native peoples of the Santa Cruz Basin, specifically the O'odham from the San Javier de Bac area and the San Javier district. So we are not an organization. We are a coalition, and we are an organizing principle. We seek to create people power so that the powers that be will understand that this land needs to be decided for by the people closest to it, and that all of the problems that this land has faced over the last 100 years have to do with people, come from people making decisions for it without asking the people closest to it. So beautiful scenes down there. This was during the monsoon, obviously. We have, native plants folks are going to look at this and see all of the non-natives in this area. And it's a real interesting situation down there because we have a whole lot of regeneration of native species. And of course, there's a whole lot of plants get called invasive as well. And they're all kind of mixed up together in this space. So this is the current land ownership situation. folks drive by frequently, you know, and we look at this land effectively has been abandoned by folks for the last 60 years, the powers that be. But frequently, people see all of this West Side Bear area as kind of all one thing. But really, there's 3 different parcels, at least in this area. Was owned by the city of Tucson and was offered back to the Tohono O'odham Nation. That sale is not final, but we are hopeful that it will work out. And Rio Nuevo currently owns these 28 some odd acres here. And we're really focused kind of from this area, just east of Mission Gardens south. So this is a picture probably from the 30s. This is the El Paso and Southern train station in the foreground here. And you can see this is the edge of downtown. And there's some foreshortening happening here due to the lens on the camera. But really, we see that without the giant barrier of I-10 taking up a lot of psychological and physical space in between, that really this land all the way to the base of the mountain was a wide floodplain for many years. We do not think that this land will ever go back to being exactly what it was. This is not a restoration project going back to some very real or imagined sort of paradise moment in history, whenever that was, right? We know that situations have changed, and our goal is not so much restoration as it is reconciliation, to come back into a better relationship with this land and with each other in relationship to it. This is 1964. This is the year after the clay pits that had been excavated all along the river channel and later filled with trash, mostly household waste. The landfill was opened from 1954 to 1963, more or less. So this is a pre-plastics era landfill. And an era when there were wildcat landfills all over the place, all throughout the basin. This is a pretty rare photo that we managed to find. And this is not actually a photo of the space. This is a photo of the brand new elevated freeway that had just been built at the same time. So we think about this era in Tucson history. We have the destruction of the most diverse 80 acres, most densely populated 80 acres in the state, with the destruction of Barrio Libre or Barrio Viejo and the putting in of the TCC. At the same time, we have the same era, we have the raised freeway, which in this photo, nowhere else does this freeway really reveal itself to be a wall as much as it does in this photo. Cutting off, the folks here relied on walking transportation to get to their jobs downtown. And at that same time, we had what had been 4,000 years of agriculture turned into quarries for clay bricks by the Tucson Press Brick Company and others, and then later a municipal landfill, and then capped. So a real era when a lot of decisions were made that we're still dealing with the repercussions of now. And we believe that the time for healing is now. And if we don't do that healing, then these problems just kind of linger. And that's why this land is still the way it is. And as Deanna Hadley says, who lives over in this area here, kind of at the base of the mountain, she says, thank God for the landfill. Because if it hadn't been for the landfill, this land would have been developed a long, long time ago. So we're in this interesting and complicated situation in which these contradictions that other times might be seen as very negative are actually more complicated and interesting. So there's plants in this presentation, I promise. In 2020, this photo isn't the best for it. I'll go all the way back to the beginning. Yeah, this one isn't great either. There's other photos where it's more obvious, but in this foreground area right about here, if you walk out there, you'll see there's kind of the elevation of some of the original capping, and then there's a rise of another 15 feet or so. In 2019, 2020, Pima County Flood Control, as part of their mandate to maintain the flow capacity of the Santa Cruz Channel, dredged the channel, and the Rio Nuevo gave them permission to place all of that material onto the landfill. And then they proceeded to spray it with their Pima County Flood Control native plant mix and walked away. And it's been really, really interesting to see what happens when you put this alluvial, pretty great soil, honestly, because it's from the bottom of the channel, on top of this closed landfill, and then walk away with no irrigation. There are mesquite trees out there, mind you, this is 4 years ago, that are about 5 feet tall, that make me jealous because the mesquites I've planted at my house haven't grown that fast. And so from some of the species that you might imagine that are pretty tough, catching on, the brittle bush and some of the other kind of more hardy plants, to all sorts of other little species are coming in. And so this is a really interesting experiment that's happened there with this land being kind of left alone. But we think we can do better in being stewards of this land. And so above anything else, this presentation is an invitation to go and get to know this space and become involved in, maybe doing species surveys or other sorts of interactions. Everybody has questions about the landfill, right? A common narrative is you have to dig, the only thing we can do is dig out the entire landfill for this land to be healing. Well, and that when you hear the phrase landfill remediation, sounds like a very positive thing. That was my opinion when I first got involved, is somebody just needs to dig it all out. And then I started listening to the people who have lived closest and have lived through that process before and smelled and dealt with the sound and the dust and the carbon and the everything else and what that entails, and it's a little bit more complicated. So the question really becomes, what is the impact of that closed landfill? This was prepared by Chuck Graff. Shout out to Chuck. He was a principal hydrologist at the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, specializing in decommissioned landfills. And so he's a real lucky, we feel really fortunate to have him interpreting the data for us. So I'm going to go through this quickly. If you will have more questions about this afterwards, we can talk. I'd love to talk about this stuff. But basically, Tucson Water has been monitoring the water quality around the landfill for 20 years, quarterly and monthly more recently. And all of that data has come together to show that there is actually no impacts on the groundwater due to that landfill. The monitoring wells, these are the gas monitoring wells. There's a study done in 2015. The landfill gases being generated are not migrating off-site. And as long as you don't build on top on a building that could allow those gases to concentrate, they actually pose no danger to humans or animals. These are the water monitoring wells. There's one actually just inside Mission Garden, one about in the Simpson Mission Lane area, and one in Kroger Lane. The water that comes out of these wells is either non-detectable or far below all contaminants of concern, as registered by the EPA, which means you could actually pump water out of these wells and drink it, which is not something you could do in many places in the Tucson Basin based off of TCE and other contamination. So that was a real shock to learn that really the trash is not having the impacts that folks might assume that it might be having. So again, these are not things we are advocating for, but things that could be possible given the environmental conditions there. And this would, decisions related to these would be made in coalition. But these are some of the uses that could possibly happen in that space. Not a danger due to gases, not a groundwater pollution source, and is compatible with open space use. But we don't own it. A development or a district owns it. So first, cute coyote. This is out on the land there. So we went through this. So this is the Rio Nuevo tax increment financing district. I'm sure you all are, might be familiar with this. The land, of course, is down here in the far corner. So you see they're expanding far to the east, and they're actually going north as well. They have 1 million projects going on that are, and every single one of them is a lot easier than trying to deal with this landfill. And so we're not trying to fight Rio Nuevo. We don't see them as an adversary. We see that, them as someone who has a problem that they don't know how to solve, And we see ourselves as a coalition of people who have ideas on how to bring a better relationship to that space. So we know that the site is unsuitable for development for all of the reasons, but from the Rio Nuevo perspective, you can't build on it because of the existence of the landfill. It's zoned for very low density uses. There's no access to it off of the streets. There would be a huge fight. And actually, the draft neighborhood plan put together by the Menlo Park and Barrio Sin Nombre neighborhood associations that will be voted on by mayor and council here in a few months advocates specifically for open space at this site. Lane Santa Cruz, the council member for Ward 1, has said that they won't support any rezoning against the neighborhood plan. So with that, there's really not a whole lot of opportunity for development at this site. And so we are really happy to say that Rio Nuevo at their last master plan decision-making meeting voted to bring their 10-year master plan related to this site in total alignment with the neighborhood's wishes. And so they have formally given up on developing this site, which is something that's pretty amazing. And not only that, but because the neighborhood plan calls for open space use, they are not only not developing it, but are interested in releasing the land to a different owner who would be able to do better by that land than they would. So there's lots of interest right now in what that would be. If you're familiar with the Santa Cruz River Urban National Wildlife Refuge effort, this is also a parallel coalition that would establish basically like an archipelago of protected parcels along the river channel from the Mexican border to Marana, more or less. And so rather than a contiguous wildlife refuge, it would be all interconnected by the river channel. But any willing landowner that would like to sell would have a willing buyer in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So they could also co-manage parcels with owners to be part of the refuge without having fee title ownership. So there's a lot of questions about what's up with this lately. The Landscape Protection Plan, which is the document that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service puts together that defines what they call the acquisition boundary. That process is moving really swiftly. You might have seen in the press a couple of weeks ago, they signed a partnership agreement between the municipalities and Fish, and that was a real kind of a step in the right direction. And so we're hopeful that even with the new incoming presidential administration, that this is far enough along, and this is an administrative, not a legislative process, that this could make it through. Because there's really no opposition to this either. This is something that folks all up and down the river corridor, which is also, of course, the I-19 corridor, see the importance of being able to bring all of the different conservation efforts that are already going on in relationship to each other through this designation. And hopefully, the birthplace site could be kind of the urban core, the urban center of this wildlife refuge. So whether that looks like the birthplace site being outright owned by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or more preferably if there's still like a community land trust, a new community land trust that would steward that land with tribal involvement and have tribal majority representation and decision-making along with the neighbors. And then that would be co-managed with Fish. Lots of really exciting options. And I know I'm talking really fast, but I wanted to get through in 20 minutes, and I just hit 20 minutes. So that's that. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
So are there similar projects that have occurred on landfills in, southern Arizona or other arid environments where they've turned one of these cap sites into like a park or a space that the public can visit?
That's a great question. There's the former Chandler, both Chandler and Gilbert, I think, have landfills that are now currently parks. And they're not the kind of park that we would imagine here. These are like high use, like playground type, like archery. They have archery ranges and like a kind of a lot of built infrastructure. And those landfills are much farther onto the problematic side of the spectrum. They actually have to have like active methane mitigation happening under them, and they still allow the public on them. The difference here is that we are right adjacent to the river corridor. And so the question of the water is what really comes up the most. But with this data that we have, it's really kind of changed the conversation. I should also say quickly that the water table had gotten down to about 180 feet in this area. It is now at 35 feet. And they have stopped flow in the Heritage project because it came up so high so quick. They stopped all release except for a small release right at the outfall to kind of maintain the little tiny marsh they have going there. So it's been on life support for a year and the water has not gone down. So what I find really, as a poet, I find really beautiful about this whole situation is the high bedrock under Sentinel Peak that caused there to be perennial flow in the Santa Cruz at this site historically. The reason humans are here, the reason the Santa Cruz River flowed perennially is the same geologic feature that now we're having to come back into relationship with and understand. And that's something that's just endlessly interesting to me. That basically, because we know the trash is about 40 feet deep at its deepest, and the water has been measured at 35, 30. So they have inadvertently done what Chuck calls the biggest science experiment that no one would have been allowed to do, which is what happens if you inundate the bottom of this landfill for a year? Will something leach out? And everybody probably would have said yes, right? Even though it's flooded many times, inundation is different, they would say, right? But because of their reporting requirements to ADEQ, they filed a report about this thick at the beginning of the year, and there's nothing there.
I had two, but now I have three questions. And maybe it's a question for Chuck. That now shallow groundwater, is that contiguous down to the bedrock or might it be on a perched?
Definitely perched.
Definitely perched on a clay lens, not continuous down to bedrock.
From my understanding, yes, that the bedrock is just
Yeah,
the
there's
perch
lots of clay lenses.
is just really high right there. Yeah.
Second question, was the buffalo grass there before the flood control district put down sediment seed?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's been there for a while.
And then
It's more of it now.
considered ephemeral toad breeding by harvesting some of the stormwater that comes onto the site.
Yes, we know. Yes, that's been a big talks. Robert Villa, who you might have seen, president of the Herpetological Society and good friend and member of TBOSC, is heavily involved. And Phil Rosen, if you all are familiar with Dr. Phil Rosen, right? Rest in power. Actually did in 2013 a whole Sonoran Desert Park plan commissioned by Pima County for this land. So this is like not new ideas, right? This has been around a long time, but now is the time. The stars have aligned. We're going to make it happen. This is actually really great to see where the flood control mound is, right? You can sit there.
Okay, spoiler, I'm actually with flood control.
Okay.
We might have to put some more sediment in sometime. Things fill in.
Yeah.
So that's a resource.
Yeah.
But the ephemeral toad breeding has to be maximized, just saying.
I think so too. Yeah.
Ephemeral toad breeding, ephemeral toads.
Yes.
Just upstream from here, there are 6 species of ephemeral toads breeding.
Statefoots.
Statefoots are the ones that pop out of the pond in 8 days. We also have Great Plains toads, the narrowmouth Sinaloan toads, let's see, red spotted toads, and of course the Sonoran Desert toads, and I'm forgetting somebody.
And the Sonoran Desert toad population is really doing well over here. They're actually the MSA annex, which is right in this area.
Oh, they love
I mean,
that.
yeah, they're just hopping around all over the place.
They distracted me at the last Native Plant Society.
Right. Um,
And I'll say from personal experience, just because it's the Native Plant Society, there's a fair amount of Parkinsonia microphylla. There's mesquites, as you mentioned. There's also quite a bit of atriplex of saltbush there. That seems to be like one of the dominant species that kind of, especially on the periphery of the buffalo grass, is doing really well. So there are these, you know, I know we've talked, probably all of you are familiar with the Waterman Restoration Site. And what John has observed is that often if you open up a space where maybe you do have a lot of invasives and you clear that out, it's not so much about reseeding as about letting that seed bank fill in. And so like the germplasm that could create more botanical diversity here already exists. And it would just be thinking about what are options for encouraging that and making sure that the space is really biodiverse.
Exactly. And we think, you know, given how well things are doing out there with no help at all, that really there's a lot of potential for kind of relatively low cost, kind of people power ways of making things happen better. Speaking of people power, this land gets talked about in rooms like this a lot, and in downtown rooms under fluorescent lights. Rather, we really like talking about this land on this land, right? Because people think of it as abandoned or blighted or toxic. And when you're out there, all of a sudden, the biodiversity really does pop out. And the views, you know, like I've been coming through Tucson my whole life. My parents lived here before I was born, lived here full-time almost 15 years. And the view that you have from right here is a view that you don't get anywhere else. You turn this way and it's downtown, you turn this way at Sentinel Peak and you can see the whole basin in 360. So it really is a place for storytelling. And so this one just passed our last kind of get together out on the land. But if you're interested, I have my laptop and I can sign you up for our email list afterwards when we're hanging out. And I would love for you to join us on one of our walk-in talks that we do out there. So you could teach me more about the plants that are out there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I know you wanted to mention a couple of books.
This one, everybody in this room needs to read. It's called The Light Eaters. The Light Eaters, and it's how the unseen world of plant intelligence. Unfortunately, she doesn't have anything in here about the cacti synchronizing their blooming. At least I don't remember it, but it's that kind of thing. How do they do that? And this is named one of the 10 best science books of the year. And she's going to be at the Tucson Book Festival. So if you have a chance to read the book, then you can